Hi, Isaac. My name is Christopher Kaufman-Ilstrup. I'm the director of Vermont Humanities, and I'm really pleased to have traveled down here from home base in Montpelier tonight to hear my very old friend, no, that's not right. My friend who I've known for a long time. You got to be precise when you work in the humanities. My friend who I've known for a very long time, since the late 1990s, talking about civil unions this evening. I'm just going to take a quick moment to say that y'all have probably been paying attention to all the stuff that's going down. If you haven't, I urge you to start. Among the stuff that's going down is the National Endowment for the Humanities, which is our federal funding partner, and they canceled our grant about 3 weeks ago, which is 42% of our annual operating budget to do programs like this for about 70,000 Vermonters every year for 1,000 events. So I want to make you aware that that is happening. Our dear friends at the Center for Cartoon Studies made us this tiny little comic book to explain the situation and tell you what you can do to help. I've handed them out to a few people. I have a few more. I'll bring them around, and would encourage you to get involved, talk to your electeds, call your family members in other states, urge them to talk to their elected officials, and contribute and support organizations that are doing cultural work all over Vermont. And I say that not just on my behalf and my organization, but on the hundreds of organizations that we work with all over Vermont and indeed all over the country every year. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to our wonderful host, Starla Tronica from Brooks Memorial Library, and she's going to introduce Bill.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Christopher, and thank you for all the good work that you and your crew do. So, good evening. My name is Starla Tronica, and on behalf of Brooks Memorial Library, I welcome you to our Snapshot event, 25 years since civil unions, lessons learned, with former Vermont Legislator Bill Lippert. Snapshot is Vermont Humanities' weekly program that hosts a variety of speakers at public libraries to foster resilient communities through engaging conversations. We extend our thanks to our partners at Vermont Humanities, as well as the generous underwriters that make it possible for us to offer such wonderful programming. The sponsor of our entire Snapshot series is the Vermont Department of Libraries, the Institute of Museum and Library Services, and the Alma Gibbs Donchen Foundation. And of course, I want to thank our wonderful community partners, BCTV, that make it possible for folks to sit at home and enjoy this program with a cup of tea. So tonight, we come together from across the state to listen, to learn, and to be inspired in community. But before we begin, I have a few announcements. We will be hosting community conversations with our state legislators this Saturday at 10:30 right here in this very same space. So please do come back. And thanks to Vermont Humanities, we will also be hosting Howard Coffin, and he will be talking about Vermont women and the Civil War. And Howard will also be speaking with our Veterans Book Group, which is also graciously sponsored by Vermont Humanities. So we're so grateful. Now you might wonder, how am I ever going to remember all that? How am I going to keep track of all the amazing things they do at the library? Well, thanks for asking. You can sign up for our online e-newsletter that only comes once a week, but it's full of great information that you might not see elsewhere, like the opening of our tool shed again, which will happen on Friday. So, I also want to mention that we're not the only library in the state that wonderful things are happening at. And the next Snapshot event, Louise Gluck, Vermont's Nobel laureate, with professor and poet Elizabeth Powell, will be hosted by the Junction Arts and Media at 6 p.m. next Wednesday, May 7th. So if you don't want to trek all the way to another library, again, you can watch it live streamed. And now it is my honor and my pleasure to introduce you to our speaker. Where did he go? Oh, good. Longtime Vermont LGBTQ political activist and politician Bill Lippert served for 29 years in the Vermont House of Representatives. He is probably best known as the only openly gay member of the General Assembly in 2000 and vice chair of the House Judiciary Committee when civil unions were created. Lippert's speech on the floor of the House during the civil unions debate has been quoted widely and credited as critical to the passage of civil unions. Lippert served through the CU political backlash and chaired the House Judiciary Committee passage of gender identity, non-discrimination, and full marriage equality legislation. And we are so honored to have you here tonight, sir. So, Bill Lippert.
Tell me if does that work for sound people and for the audience and for those at home? I'm sure there's many people listening at home. Okay, well, thank you. And let me start by thanking those who make it possible to be here. Vermont Humanities, Christopher and Jacob, who's over off to the side, the Brooks Library, and CCTV. Did I get it right? No, I got it wrong. That's up north. B is in Brattleboro, right? Well, thank you. And thank you for offering sign language interpretation as well. Well, 25 years ago, it seems like a long time. And at the same time, it seems for some of us like it was not that long ago. That, at least for myself, when I start to tell the stories, and there are so many stories to tell about what happened when in the creation of civil unions, in the arc of Vermont creating civil unions, the backlash against civil unions, eventually bringing full marriage equality to Vermont in 2009, when I had the honor of chairing the committee when we did full marriage equality, to the Obergefell decision in 2015, where marriage equality was brought to the entire country, to today, when we are faced with some unknowns. But I want to tell you stories that start at the beginning, because I think it's really important for us to know our stories and to share our stories. In part, because I think there are some lessons to be learned. In part, because some of the stories are inspirational. Some of the stories still touch my heart today. I can find myself, as I'm sharing some of my experiences back then, tearing up, to be honest. Because there was incredible moral courage. There was incredible personal courage, political courage that was demonstrated in the year 2000. And I want to tell you about some of those stories because it really matters. In a day like today when we're once again I think, in need of models of political, moral, and personal courage, looking to some of our experiences in life here in Vermont can help. As I said, it kind of girds me. It girds my sense of determined hopefulness in the face of challenges, some of which we haven't experienced before. Well, invariably when I'm given the opportunity to speak, because I consider it an opportunity, I was just having this amazing conversation. Jacob had to say, "Hey, we're about to start. Could you guys because we just started talking. I started to talk with Kate O'Connor, who as she said, I was there. And I said, yes, Kate, that's how I feel. Like I say to people, like, I didn't just have to read about it somewhere, but civil unions, Kate was there. And Annette Cappy used to be, and now I think Annette LeBlanc, who was, well, let me back up just a second. I should have properly introduced Kate O'Connor, who was, I forget your official title, but really the person standing next to Howard Dean at virtually every important moment of his governorship and his run for president. And she has stories to tell. Let me tell you, invite her to speak sometime. I'm sure there's many stories to tell. And Annette, who I've met, but I don't know particularly well. But when I was thinking about coming to Brattleboro, I thought, I've got to invite some of the Brattleboro people who were like key to this. I may say more in a few minutes, but Annette has the distinction of having issued the very first civil union license ever, anywhere, not just Vermont, anywhere in the world. And she did that because it meant something important to two women who wanted to be what I would call joined in civil union, because it was at the time the only full legal recognition for a same-sex couple. And I'm deeply grateful to both of you. Like I say, there are so many stories to tell. I'll get to share some of them tonight. And yesterday, I had the unexpected opportunity to speak with David Goodman. Some of you may know the name David Goodman. He has a podcast called Vermont Conversation. He's written books with his sister Amy Goodman, who's has national exposure as well. But I'll tell you that, so David got in touch with me and said, hey, Bill, would you do a 30-minute interview for Vermont Conversation tomorrow? And I was like, sure, I can do that. And part of it was because David was there. He was there observing, reporting. I was there on March 15th, 2000, on the floor of the House of Representatives here in Vermont, where I was a member of the House Judiciary Committee who had created the civil unions legislation. And I brought some pictures. Sorry, God, keep the mic going here. Anyway, I brought on this table and back there, we actually, to be quite honest, we secretly, actually one of the members said, we're going to take a picture of ourselves together because we think this is historic. Other people may be upset with us, other people may be pleased, but we think it's important. So Judy Livingston, one of our members, hired a photographer and said, let's go sneak into the lieutenant governor's office. We're not going to tell anybody we're doing it, and we're going to have a photograph taken of our committee. I think this may be the first public sharing of these photographs since we had them taken 25 years ago. We share them amongst ourselves. I think it's okay. I was on the floor of the House when we were debating civil unions. Now, I'm not sure who all knows how much of the story, but I think many of you probably have some sense of the arc of six courageous Vermonters applied for marriage licenses because two courageous Vermont attorneys, Beth Robinson and Susan Murray, and their equally courageous partner from Boston, help me, Mary Bonato. Suddenly, it's age. The names just kind of go out of the brain some days. With Mary Bonato, the litigants applied for marriage licenses because their relationships were deep caring, loving relationships, and they deserved the same benefits of marriage that heterosexual couples could get. They, of course, were denied. It went to the Vermont Supreme Court. And the Baker decision was issued by the Vermont Supreme Court, which said all the rights, privileges, and responsibilities of the marriage statutes belong to same-sex couples in Vermont under the Common Benefits Clause of the Vermont Constitution. But surprise, we're going to leave it up to the legislature to decide whether the marriage statute should get opened fully or whether some as yet undetermined legal alternative might be possible to meet the constitutional demand that the Vermont Supreme Court had just issued. That was, I think it was December 20th when the Baker decision came down. The legislature convenes in January. I was now the only openly gay member of the Vermont General Assembly. And Beth Robinson had promised, Bill, you and your colleagues will never have to vote on gay marriage. That's what it was called back then, gay marriage. Not to worry. Many of my colleagues would approach me and go, Bill, I mean, it's hard to explain how controversial it was back then. States were passing constitutional amendments against gay marriage. The Defense of Marriage Act was being passed at the national level. People were really worked up about all this. And suddenly, the Vermont legislature was thrust into the midst of this. And I remember also, oh, by the way, there's actually a terrific article in this issue just this past week of 7 Days. I'll give a shout out to the reporter who did it. She interviewed a lot of different people, a lot of us. And it goes on for like 6 or 7, 8 pages. It's an extended, really well done account, and very personal in some ways. I encourage you, if you haven't seen it, go online and read it, because they've also embedded some of the actual speeches in the article. So you can click on speeches from some of my colleagues. You can click on my speech. You can click on a documentary that has been made called The State of Marriage, which shows the whole arc of all of this. So where was I? So suddenly the legislature was ablaze with controversy. And we were fortunate to have the leadership of our chair, Tom Little, a Republican, and there were, I think, 5 Democrats, 5 Republicans, 4 Republicans, 1 progressive. The long and short of it was we took enormous amounts of testimony. And it was clear, I supported marriage at that point, but it was clear there wasn't going to be enough votes to pass marriage. Now, people say to me over the years, have said regularly, I don't understand why you didn't just pass marriage. Because after all, they'd done it in Canada, they'd done it in the Netherlands, they'd done it and they name all these different countries, and I go, actually, no. It had never been done anywhere in the world. The whole focus, the attention on Vermont was so enormous because, in fact, there was the possibility that our court might have granted, and even when they didn't, that the legislature would grant it. And even so, and it was terribly disappointing for the advocates from the Vermont Freedom to Marry Task Force that our committee couldn't. Our conclusion was we could create a parallel structure, but we couldn't find the votes for marriage. But I'll tell you so But Tom Little and our legislative council did something brilliant. They found a way to amend every Vermont statute, every Vermont court decision, every administrative ruling by simply saying, every place it says marriage, we're going to substitute the word civil unions. Every place it says husband and wife, we're going to substitute parties to a civil union. Every place it says divorce, we'll make a new word. We'll call it disillusion, because people don't want us to mess with their marriages, you know? So we did everything we could and just changed, I think, 4 words and said, all these other places, substitute and grant same-sex couples all the rights and privileges of the marriage statutes. It wasn't marriage. But it was the first time when we brought the bill to the floor, we didn't have the votes. We didn't know if we had the votes. And the hope was on the part of the opponents that if we could stop it in Vermont, we can stop it everywhere. And our hope was that if we pass it in Vermont, we'll set ourselves in motion for the rest of the country. So the pressure was enormous. And I want to just say that I consider it a blessing that I had the opportunity to rise on the floor of the House chamber on March 15th after about 8 hours of debate on the House floor, where I heard some of the things said, and I said to my spouse, Enrique, that I considered quoting some of the horrific things that were said, and he said, no, they don't need to hear that anymore. No one needs to hear that. But there had been so many nasty things said about us. And I, being the only openly gay member of the General Assembly, had the opportunity to stand and say what was true about us, what was true about gay men, what was true about lesbian women, what was true about our relationships. And I may decide to share and read a little bit of the speech I gave because it has been reprinted and people have been touched by it. And frankly, I'm still moved when I read it. Because it was that kind of opportunity when you can bear witness to what is true in the world. You can bear witness to what I call, and what many of us call, the goodness of gay men and lesbian women. The deep, loving, committed relationships that we have that truly deserved everything that could be given in terms of rights and responsibilities. I want to just mention, oh, by the way, we won. We won. It was a close vote. We didn't know if we had the votes, but when we were done, we had won. And I have to say that when the chair of the committee came over to me and leaned over and said, Bill, it's time to talk. We need to hear from you. You need to speak. Because he knew that there was something that I could bring to the debate that no one else on the House floor could, because I was the only openly gay member of the General Assembly. And so I spoke from my heart. And I had many people tell me they were in tears because it touched their hearts. For those who weren't there, the chamber was filled by hundreds of people. and there were people outside the chamber because it couldn't hold enough people. And I think what I want you to take from this is not so much what a fabulous job I did, although I'm proud. I've come to claim my role. What I want you to understand as well, and this is one of the lessons learned, if you will, from the title of tonight's talk. One of the lessons learned is that when there is a group of people who are marginalized or under attack, it's really important to have someone from that group who's at the table, not just having someone talk about who it is, but to have someone, in this case it was me, at the table. That I could bring the lived experience of being a gay man, of being in a relationship with another man. I could bring the lived experience of having endured hateful, homophobic prejudices in my life and in the State House. But I could also say what was true. So one of the takeaways, one of the lessons learned is we need people at the table, not just around, not sitting on the edges. But I had one vote. And one of the other lessons learned that I want to just emphasize is when we're making social change, when we're making big change, we who are part of the marginalized group need to have built relationships with folks outside of the group. And those relationships are what allowed other members of the House and Senate in 2000 to take risks, political risks, that they might not ever have chosen to do if they hadn't gotten to know not just me sitting as a colleague, although I think that was very important, but the courageous sharing from gay and lesbian individuals all across the state who called and talked and told their stories, their deeply personal stories, to legislators, to reporters, to newspapers, who talked about how hard it had been, who talked about how frightening it is to be the target of discrimination and hatefulness. And I had many of my colleagues say, as what I would call allies, people who stand with someone else, stand beside them, even though they're not part of the marginalized group. We had amazing allies. And I actually wrote down some of their names. Because in fact, when the election came around in the fall of 2000, many of those legislators were defeated. And many of them went into the vote on civil unions in 2000 knowing full well that it might be their last vote. And there's a quotation from, I'm going to paraphrase it, but on the table over there, I have framed, and it sits on a bookcase in our living room, a quotation from Representative Marion Milne from Washington, Republican. She had just been named, I think, Woman of the Year, Woman Legislator of the Year earlier in the session. But people said things to her and treated her when she went door to door, said things to her and about her that were just shocking. She told stories about she went door to door with one of her grandchildren And Marion, who was, as Howard Dean said, strong as steel, but she said, my grandchild didn't deserve to hear those things. I mean, I could take it, but why did my grandchild hear that? People slammed doors in her face. But basically, she stood up and gave an incredible speech and said, she talked about what had happened. Then she said, I will not be silenced by hatred and prejudice. Now, maybe I misquoted by paraphrasing, and I wish I had the quote right in front of me. But she said, if this is the last vote I give, I will have served the people of Vermont well. She knew she would not be reelected, and she wasn't. And John Edwards from Swanton, a colleague of mine from the House Judiciary Committee, a retired state trooper who said, we used to joke, he said, I didn't come here to do gay marriage. I came here to do stronger border security, law enforcement. He had his own legislative agenda. It was not gay marriage. But I got to tell you, he got to know me and he got to know Enrique because we served on the House Judiciary Committee together. And he would ask me, how's Enrique doing, when Enrique was hospitalized at one point? Something which seems so simple, but it's the kind of small but very important, caring question that is often not asked of us or about our spouse, even today. And he knew he would not be reelected if he voted for this. And he talks about it in that article. He talks about it in the movie, State of Marriage. He's a friend of ours to this day. And both Marion Milne and John Edwards said to me on numbers of occasions, I have never one day regretted my vote for civil unions, ever. And I just want to read the names of legislators who voted for civil unions and were defeated, because they are my heroes. There are heroes also, those who voted for civil unions and got reelected, so I could read a really long list, but I won't. But Joyce Barbieri of Wallingford, Diane Carmoli of Rutland City, John Edwards of Swanton, Ann Ginnivan of Middlebury, Bob Kinsey of Craftsbury, former Republican leader of the House, Jerry Kreitzer of Rutland City, Richard Mallory of Brookfield, Dick Mallory, former congressman for Vermont, Mary Mazzarello of Rutland City, who stood on the House floor and for the first time ever publicly during the debate on civil unions said, I've never said this publicly before, but my two lesbian daughters. And for that phrase to come through her lips was a huge, huge step for her. But my two lesbian daughters deserve this as much as anyone. Marion Milne of Washington, Al Perry of Richford, the captain of a submarine in the Navy, who did not come to the State House to vote for gay marriage, but did and was defeated. Barbara Postman of Brownington, Al Stevens of Newbury, Alan Weiss of Northfield, Bill Wiesel of Bristol, and Bill Fife of Newport City, who stayed on the floor of the House for the first roll call, despite the fact that his wife was in the hospital and he was supposed to go to the hospital. Peter Brownell of Chittenden County got defeated as a senator, and Mark McDonald, a social studies teacher in the Senate from Orange County, who people said, Mark, we have enough votes. We don't need your vote. You can vote no. Until people started asking, what will you tell your students when you go back to your social studies class? And he said, I couldn't go back to my students and tell them I voted against my conscience because I wanted to get reelected, not because it was the right thing to do. These people deserve to be remembered as heroes. There's a lot of stories to tell. I'm going to tell you one more, and then I'm going to stop because I promised I would have some time for Q&A. Because I want to hear some of your questions as well, and I'll talk a little more too. But do you know what? We made up the term civil unions in the House Judiciary Committee in Vermont. Now, Kate and I were talking, and then Annette and I were talking, and the phrase that kept coming, I was there. I was there. Kate was there when the governor signed the civil unions bill. Annette was there when she issued the very first civil union license anywhere. I was there when we made up the term civil unions. Someone in one of the hearings that we had said, by whatever you do, and I remember, and I know who it was Donna Lesko, give her credit. She said, by whatever you do, don't call it domestic partnership. It makes it sound like I was hired to clean the house. And so that killed that right on. And let me tell you, that people kept hearing her, what she had said. It reverberated over and over. And then we said, we got to call it something because we got to get this bill out to the floor. And we've debated who said what, but we're pretty certain who said it within our committee. And someone said, oh, how about civil accord? That sounds majestic in some ways. And someone else said, that sounds like the make of a car. Back in the day, accords used to be more popular. But we decided on civil union because people were confused between the religious ceremony and the civil ceremony. And we wanted to make it clear we were not mucking around with anybody's marriage. Promise, no, your marriages are intact. People were really worried, let me tell you. So we call it civil and civil union. But you know what? I remember the first time that civil union, I remember when President George Bush said, I couldn't support gay marriage, but I think I could support civil unions. And I went, oh my God, we made that up and the president's using it. And then later, I heard the Pope say it. And I thought, now that is something special. To come up with a phrase or a word that becomes so much a part of the lexicon of the language that everyone from the president to the Pope to, I think it was the president of Brazil one time, I just kept going, I can't believe this. Yeah. Anyway, I kind of, as you can tell, I kind of enjoyed that. Well, I got to tell you this one more story. Enrique said to me, what is this? It's These Green Mountains. It's the state song now. So guess what was going on in the committee room right next to where we were doing civil unions, trying to address the Baker decision. One of the other committees of the legislature, the General and Military Affairs Committee, they were hearing auditions for the new state song. And we could hear them through the wall. And we kind of got a kick out of that because it was kind of a counterpoint to what we were doing in a way. We weren't involved. We didn't get to vote until they proposed which one should be. I actually kind of like this, even though it never mentions Vermont in the lyrics. But I've heard it sung beautifully many times now. But someone came up to me in the midst of this. Oh, yeah, you need to know one other fact. One of our colleagues who was leading the fight, who was an attorney, and who I actually am friends with still to this day, can you believe it? Representative Peg Flory. She led the fight on the floor against civil unions. She lost, by the way, just in case you know the end of the story. But she was on the committee that was listening to the state song, picking the state song. And then leading the fight, listening to horrible people, not horrible people, listening to people saying horrible things about us as gays and lesbians. And someone came up, and we were about to vote on what's the state song, and someone came up to me and said, Bill, you really ought to know this. And Peg presented the state song on the floor of the House. He said, you really ought to know the two women who wrote the lyrics and the tune to the new state song, they're lesbian women. And I must say, I got a real kick out of that. Because, in fact, if we were that horrible, if there was so many bad things about us, we were just about to adopt the new state song written by people from our community. And so I got a special kick out of that. I'm going to stop there for now. I would love to go on. You can ask me about the teddy bear sometime and the little I never got to my speech, but I can tell you, you can listen to it, go to the 7 days article, and you can click and hear me giving my speech. And some months later, I got this little piece of artwork came in a box in the mail to me with a little note that said, Representative Lippert, I made 101 little art stages. I've sent you one of them, but each one of them has a phrase from your speech. That blew me away. Help me with her name, Emily Anderson, who did this, touched me deeply. Clearly it had touched her. And again, I think, I'm going to open it up to a few questions here. But I think what I want to say is, we have the opportunity, when given the opportunity, take the opportunity to speak the truth. Take the opportunity to speak what's true about the people you know and love. In this case, it was a blessing that I had, that I was given the opportunity to stand and share what was true about my people, the gay and lesbian community. And it's especially important for us to do that, someone said to me, because trans people are part of the LGBTQ, and they are being viciously attacked in this day and age in a way that somehow we've gotten a little more of a acceptance. But our trans family members have every reason to be terrified right now. It's the same type of terrorizing. It's the same type of hatefulness. And what someone said recently in a meeting I was at where someone spoke, who was themselves trans, said, see if I can get this right. What trans people need now more than anything from us is love, not rights. They need rights, and we needed rights back then. We also needed love. And today, it's our turn to stand up for our family members who are trying to live their lives with integrity and honesty. And I would just encourage us to hold our trans family members in our hearts. So with that, I'm going to stop and then entertain some more questions. Thank you.
Yep.
And I've introduced you, Kate, but say it again.
I'm going to say I'm Kate O'Connor from Brattleboro, and I just want to make sure people really understand what Bill and his colleagues did, because I know I encounter this a lot. We live in Brattleboro, we live in Vermont, and we just take it for granted that, everyone's going to be okay with civil unions or whatever. But 25 years ago, even in our state, it was not like that. And, so Bill's not really, I just want everyone to understand the sort of hatred and the energy against doing civil unions that was out there. And it was very personal. And there were some people who were against it for, they weren't mean people. They just could not conceive of this. And a lot of it was religious reasons. But there were really, I think for me, and I'm not a member of the LGBTQ community, so I was sort of a bystander to what was something that I didn't know existed. And I saw things in my state that I just never thought I would see, which is, some of it was wonderful, but it began with such really real hatred. And there were a lot of people like Bill that stood up in that state house and did the right thing. And for you to say, oh, it was packed, it was packed. And that state house was not just packed that day. It was from the first day that the legislature went into session that year. So it's really, I'd always like to say to people, you think we live in a state where we're progressive, we're liberal, we're accepting, but I've never experienced something like that, and I know, but people that are in the minority, have. And so I think it was an eye-opener for all of us. But what, I want to elevate what Bill and his colleagues did, because it wasn't easy by any means. And I'm really glad as a state we've sort of come around to, and we had the whole Take Back Vermont campaign that occurred, but I think it's, what you said at the end, we need to love people and just remember it's so easy for people not to. So I just want to thank Bill and just make sure everybody understands really what it was like in Vermont 25 years ago.
Thank you, Kate.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for everything you've done, and everyone else. I remember...
Can you hold the mic closer? Can
you hear me?
Yeah. That's a little
I
better.
remember when Cambridge, Massachusetts was going through their struggles in getting bills on the floor passed. And I was a youngster then, but I was part of that kind of group. And I didn't do anything in particular, but I was sort of a wallflower. And it was a struggle watching that, and the hate, and just people made stuff up. So I could just, as you were talking, I could just imagine what you had to deal with from your colleagues and other people around you, walking home, whether or not you were going to be safe walking home. So, thank you.
Thank you.
This is a fan letter to you 25 years later. I meant to write it at the time. I composed it, but like so many letters that I intend to write and mail, it never happened. And so when I saw that you were coming to Brattleboro, I thought, okay, it's time to deliver this, because you and your colleagues and those efforts have made our state so much better. And so, thanks.
I'd love to know who the fan letter's from. Will you share your name? Is that okay?
Oh, Holly Bowen.
Thank you, Holly. Letter received. Letter deeply received, gratefully received.
Speaking of the post office, I just want to call out Rita Gluck, who wrote These Green Mountains by name, one of the lesbians, who was a many decades postal delivery person in Montpelier, and was my postal delivery person, and probably the most famous person in Montpelier who wasn't a legislator. Everybody knows and loves Rita and her family. So I wanted to just give her that moment and say, queer people have done so much for Vermont in so many ways, whether it's delivering your mail and saying hi and being friendly, or standing up on the floor of the House and being incredibly courageous. Living your truth comes in all kinds of different ways.
It does.
My name is Marcia. I'm coming from Rutland. I recognize some of those heroes on that name, so I will think of them with a little more gratitude. If you were giving that speech today, how would it be the same and how would it be different to address now?
Well, I think what immediately comes to mind is that I cannot stand in the place of someone who's marginalized as a member of the trans community because it's not my life experience. But that makes me think of a story I want to tell. Because when I said representation matters, lesson learned, representation matters, I have the good fortune to have met, I don't know well, but a trans legislator was elected in Montana, Zoe Zephyr. And some of the most horrific bills are being introduced across the country to make parents of trans children be investigated as child abusers, making it illegal for trans people to use any restroom anywhere in a whole state if it's not the restroom aligned with their birth gender. Think about that for a minute. Not just in one place or another. Zoe Zephyr got elected in Montana as an out trans legislator. And she stood up on the floor of the Montana House of Representatives and gave a speech, the kind of speech that I couldn't give, but she gave, and said how completely outrageous were some of these things, how insulting. She has a child. I'm just trying to be a good mother. I'm trying to raise my child, and you're throwing all these things at me and in my way. And she was compelling because it was personal, because it was deeply meaningful. And 12 Republican legislators in Montana joined with her and voted no and defeated some of these anti-trans bills in the House of Representatives in Montana. Those are the kind of victories we need to know about. Those are the kind of victories we need to remember. And so my speech would be maybe similar, more akin to what I was trying to share with you tonight. It's time for us. It's time for me to be an ally to trans people. It's time for us to be allies to people of color. It's time for us to be allies around the rampant racism that's being given permission all across this country by saying, get rid of DEI. In some ways, it's like another code word for racism. So there are lots of opportunities for us to be allies. And I think I do need to challenge myself to be a vocal and visible ally in all of these ways. And to not take for granted at the same time what has happened. Yeah, let's just stop there. Thank you. I want to ask Annette to just be able to be recognized, because I mentioned your name, but you don't need to say anything. But I just do you know that Annette opened the town clerk's office in Brattleboro, I think at 12, a few minutes before midnight on July 1st, 2000, so that two women who were eager to be the first couple to have a civil union could come and get their license. And then what's the story? They went down to the park and had a ceremony. I just think we need to recognize some of our local heroes as well.
Thank you. Yes, Well, when the law passed, it was to be effective July 1st.
Right.
Well, as it happened, July 1st was a Saturday, and July 4th was on a Tuesday. So that meant, for some clerks, a long weekend. And it also meant, in some towns, where clerks and the townspeople were not accepting, their chance to make a statement, where even though they were often open on a Saturday for regular clerk hours, they were going to close for the whole weekend just to make their statement. And I just thought that was mean. It just wasn't a very nice thing to do. And I also thought that there were so many people that had waited so long for this to happen, and now they have to wait 4 days for everyone to get done celebrating the 4th of July, Independence Day. So this couple wanted to be married at midnight, and I said, why not? It just felt like the right thing to do. So that's what we did. And there was a lot of controversy when you were talking about the hate, and you were talking about the hate. My office received all kinds of hate mail. We had police that night. The service was, I issued the license at midnight, and then we walked across the street to Wells Fountain, and that's where the ceremony was performed. And most people didn't know about it at the time, but there were police hidden all over in the bushes, all up and down the street. Cars going up and down the street, a lot of them were yelling obscenities as it was going on. But there were also plainclothesmen, cops, going up and down the street in cars just watching for something to happen. So it was an interesting evening, but it was one of the most wonderful things I feel like I've ever done.
Thank you. Thank you for doing that.
So I have another Annette story. My husband and I have become good friends with two women from Dallas who came to Brattleboro to have a civil union with Annette. And I don't know the date, I don't remember the date, but early on, they loved Annette so much, they loved Brattleboro so much that they moved to Brattleboro. They bought a house. One of them her company had an office in Boston, so she could transfer. And they lived here for quite a while, and now they're back in Dallas. And I don't know whether you went, but my husband and I went to their wedding on video when they were finally able to be married. It was just very moving. And
that's great.
We all are still great friends. So yes. And when Annette's husband died, they came and stayed with us so that we could all be here for Annette. So there's all kinds of ramifications.
Yeah, and I encourage us to tell the stories to each other. Tell stories to your family, to your friends. And I have one last thing I want to say before I finish, but go ahead, Annette.
Well, I just have one story I'd like to share. It was two women that had come from Florida, of all places. And they were the greatest couple, just like so many of the other couples that we met and that we never would have had a chance to know had it not been for this. And they were, as we're issuing the license, they were just chatting away and saying, you know, this is just so wonderful. And people don't realize we're everywhere. We're your kids' teachers. We're your doctors. We're your nurses. We're your garbage men picking up. We're just like everyone else. The only thing different about us is sex. And that's all people can vote, can see about us. But you know, again, we're just like everyone else. Who the heck has time? and it was just all of these wonderful couples that meant so much. And they're right. They were everywhere, as they said. And to come full circle, when I retired, at the select board meeting, the town manager asked if I would come because they wanted to say a few words upon my retirement and all that. And they did bring up this issue. And my daughter had come with me, and I'm going to cry because I cry all the time. My grandson had come with me too. And as they're talking about the civil unions, he was about 15. He wasn't born when all of this had happened. He reached over and he held my hand and he kissed my cheek and he said, "Thank you for all you've done for people like me, and you didn't even know me at the time."
Well, one of the notes I wrote to myself is, I only have 1 hour to tell all these stories, but I'm glad we've gotten to hear some other stories as well. So I want to say two things, one of which I forgot and one of which I'm just remembering. I don't know. Is there something in the water system here in Brattleboro? I mean, I don't know, but I have to at least call out Mike Pichek and Becca Ballant. I'm sorry. I'm not sorry at all. They have directed appreciation in my direction for the work that I've done over the years, but I also want to call them out because they have taken courageous stands to be who they are in today's environment as out, gay, lesbian, people willing to engage in the politics of today. And so I want to just acknowledge Mike and Becca for what they're doing. And then the thing I most forgot to do, and I have a big note here to me, and it's circled and I didn't do it, is to acknowledge my spouse, Enrique, who doesn't like the limelight like apparently I do. But this is all about affirming our relationships. This is all about the love that two men or two women experience and the commitment that we can have. And I said, make sure you acknowledge Enrique the first thing you do when you start talking. But I'm glad I at least remembered now, dear. And we had a civil union, and then we had our wedding, and we did them on the same day so we could have one anniversary. I mean, really. So this is our 36th year together. People say, well, when did you get married? Well, that's easy, when it became legal. And when did you know? But in any case, thank you all. It's been a pleasure to be here. Oh, the bear. Okay, I will. Can I tell you one other? So we passed civil unions. The sad part is that we lost our majority in the House because of all those folks getting defeated. So suddenly in 2000, anyway, the next legislative session, and for 2 legislative sessions, we were in an anti-civil union House dominated by people who ran for election in order to repeal civil unions. It was pretty nasty. They actually held meetings in the State House where they bring in a speaker to say, yeah, thank you, Enrique, where they bring in a speaker to say how immoral and awful we are. But and every Tuesday in the House Judiciary Committee was testimony taken strictly about how to repeal civil unions and why it should be repealed. And the majority of the members of the committee who had been appointed had been elected to repeal civil unions. I asked to be on that committee regardless because I wanted to be in the room, as hard as it was. And I sat there, and across the room from me every Tuesday were 2 women, a couple from Putney, who said to me, we just want you to be able to look across the room in the midst of this hateful Tuesday and to see somebody who's pleased with you as a gay man, who's pleased that you're a gay male legislator. And this teddy bear, they sent me something every Tuesday throughout that session. One week it was a teddy bear. Another week it was a box of chocolates. Another week it was a flower arrangement. And they did that consistently for week after week after week. As you can tell, it still touches me today what that meant. So don't ever underestimate what it means to to do a gesture in the direction of somebody who's working hard to do what's right. And so I decided to bring the teddy bear along so I could tell you that story.